Okay, well, welcome everybody to the last webinar of the week. We're really pleased today to have Jacqui Brown, who is the going to talk to us about returning to work COVID compliant, and she is the founding director of Health and Safety Assurance Services. Just to let you know, we are recording the webinar, so if you don't want to be on screen, please just turn your screen off, and we will have a chance for questions at the end of the presentation. You can either put them into the chat function, or you can stick your hand up when Jacqui finishes, and we'll get to you and answer your question. So Jacqui, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a lovely warm welcome. Hello to everybody. Those that already know me, great to see you here, and those that don't, you'll soon realise that risk is what I do for a living, but actually health and safety is one of the fundamental channels that feed into risk. I'm always about a pragmatic approach, but it's hand-holding people through so that, God forbid, something goes wrong, that you have a defence to actually fall back on that's robust. Because ultimately we are all human and we won't always think of everything, but making sure we've got a process in place and a logic behind our thinking is really important. So what I'm touching on today is how we're returning to work, government guidelines, and also the roadmap to success in terms of the evidence that you've got to have. I'll also touch on the risk assessment, both the corporate one and at the operational levels, and be delighted to take questions as well, as Alison has said, either in the chat as we go, which I'd be guided by Alison if anybody's done that, because I can't see that section, but also Q&A at the end. So what I would say is, going back 12 months, and would any of us have had any idea what we're currently experiencing, both personally and actually business-wise? Certainly, I deal with a lot of global businesses as well as local businesses and charities, and even the big boys didn't necessarily have pandemic in their risk portfolios to the extent that they should have. So it's been a huge learning curve for everybody. We're all getting used to the new ways, aren't we? Going to the supermarkets, and I had a rare day off on Wednesday, went to the coast, and actually I saw 2 ice cream parlours opposite each other. One was chock-a-block and one was quite quiet, but their approach of how they'd actually got back to working was very, very different, even though they were identical shops. One had all the tapes, the markings on the floor, a barrier in front of their staff. The staff were wearing masks. And the other shop, by comparison, was quite large inside. So they'd just chosen to actually have one barrier and a line on the floor. Now, there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong way of doing this, and I'd like you to bear that in mind as we go through. It will be different for every business. So it's the principles I'd like you to be able to take away today. So winding back to February, come November, December, January, I've been going right around the globe for a particular client, and I came back in February and I felt really rough. I was dealing with health professionals all around the world as part of what I do, and I'm pretty certain back in February I caught COVID-19. I experienced all of the things that are on the list, and I duly stayed at home but had no idea that's what I'd got. It transpires later, certainly coming into March and all the government advice that was coming through, that I was almost certain that I've had this. This has been around since at least last November, certainly in some parts of the world, and it was coming to the UK then. So back in those early days in February, we tried to put something in place for clients that got them starting to think about this, because we were ahead of the game here. We knew it was here in the UK. So if you just have a little look at this in terms of the action plan at the bottom, what we did was suggesting that leadership teams and teams on the ground were starting to think about their arrangements. It was about the building and your processes, your documents. Communication was absolutely key on this one, and preparing the workforce was what was actually going to be coming. What extra resources did you need, and how are we going to audit and monitor this? Because what's happened in terms of COVID-19, all of you will have your own health and safety management systems. Some will be much larger than others. It will be fit for purpose for your job and your particular company. But this COVID-19, it pulls on every single segment of your safety management system. So it doesn't matter whether it's PPP, chemicals, training, leadership, everything gets touched with this one, which is why as it was arriving, there was a lot of people thinking, how do we actually deal with this? Because we're only used to dealing with certain segments of our management system. So that's why it started to cause so much of a problem, apart from everything that was happening on the ground health-wise. So for today's purpose, I'm just using a fictitious company name, but I'm just going to take you through a couple of processes here. But remembering behind this, it's all about looking after your people, keeping them safe while they're undertaking your activities. And at the moment, we're told, certainly, if you're able to work at home, still work from home is the preferred way of doing it. And naturally, with health and safety, you've got that umbrella of duty of care, not only to yourself, to others, to third parties, contractors, visitors. There's that umbrella in place. So make sure that you actually keep focus on that. So how did we start? Well, most companies will have gone, crisis is here, let's pull our crisis team together. So it was thinking in the early days of who do we need in our team beyond the normal business crisis, and certainly HR, comms, an administrator to actually be in control of all the extra tasks that were going to be happening was going to be vital. And IT has come into its own, hasn't it, with everybody working at home for such a long period of time. If we haven't got our IT right, we didn't have that person on our crisis committee, then we were going to be having problems. Now for this one, consultation and communication, two key pieces of legislation, are absolutely vital for what we're going through. Some companies I've seen have actually chosen to have their health and safety or wellbeing committee as the process for that communication. Others have done it in different ways, pulling in a sample range of people at varying levels to actually test their processes, procedures and things that they want to put in place. As soon as we started being sent home, it was a how often do we need to communicate and how are we going to do it? Zoom really did come into its own, but there's Teams and WebEx, whichever platform you're using, we really couldn't have done without it in this period of time. But also the other biggie was we haven't faced this before. What other external advice do we need? And certainly there'll be your insurers, risk specialists, legal, occupational health, certainly in terms of some of perhaps your vulnerable staff, your accountants, tax. It's pulled on lots and lots of external resources here that you needed. But my hope is that you've got through that bit and that we're actually starting to come out the other side now and start moving into actually what have we definitely got to have in place to cover ourselves. So back in May, the government issued 8 suites of guidance for all different sectors of business. So we've got construction, factories and plants, the labs, offices and contact centres, working in other people's homes, restaurants offering takeaways and delivery, shops and branches, and also finally we've got if you're in vehicles. So in this arrived 8 documents. Not necessarily everybody was aware of these actually arriving. It was quite quietly done, so I put the link there so you can pull down the full documents if you would like. But what I would appreciate you doing is actually having a little think in terms of your own business and which ones relate to your business. And you might find that there's more than just one. So for my fictitious one for today, certainly they've got warehouses, they've got offices, they work in other people's homes because they've got residents, and also they work in vehicles. Now that might not just be company vehicles, that might be that you want them to be using their own. So have a think about what is your risk profile there, because that's going to be the base of understanding the guidance that you've got to follow. Now, one thing that's really important is recording the decisions that you make, that's individually and collectively on behalf of the business. Now, this is important in terms of protection because you will be making decisions every day, but you won't necessarily have all the facts that will come out in the future. And what we find is it's easy to say, in hindsight, we'd have done something differently. But if you work on the basis that you've got a certain amount of information in front of you and you're making a decision to the best of your ability based on the information you have at that time, that forms part of your protection if somebody actually decides to claim against you in the future, whether that's a third party or an employee. And it doesn't take long to do, but the importance of that, I can't stress enough. It really will protect you individually. Also, if you haven't already, make sure that you've got an action plan in place. There are so many actions that come out of COVID-19. It's making sure that you assign the responsibilities and that you make sure you get all of these things closed off, because it's so easy. You're juggling so many balls, and you've got obviously the added difficulties, the financial side as well, and the customers and clients and all those sorts of things. So put it into some kind of Excel or software that will do it for you. We use Smartsheet. It's a free service, and it comes out like a Gantt chart, which can be shared amongst groups of people. So it's live at any one time, and we find that great for clients. But ultimately, I'm not here to sell any product whatsoever, I can assure you. But certainly having a tool like that really does help with the planning. And again, it's your evidence. This is what we followed, this is what we did. And it will keep growing and evolving just by the very nature of what's going on out there. So in terms of next, what I would suggest is that you actually take the government guidance and form it into an audit document. Now, what we've done, and I've just given you a snapshot there, is that all the things the government's asking us to do in offices are down the left-hand side, and we've just simply put in an Excel spreadsheet that says, have we done it? Yes, no, or is it planned? Comments in red we've still got to do that go into our action plan, and the ones that are black and just yes, we know we're solid on those. It's quite straightforward to do, but I'm very keen to help Herts Chamber members. So I know that we have already written offices, people homes, vehicles, and we've also done factories and laboratories. So we've done 5 out of the 8, which match much of our client profile. And I'll be happy to share the base documents if Alison's happy with that. It gives me a nod. So that's your starter 10. You haven't got to build that yourself. That will be a benefit of having come onto the webinar. So just be mindful, these documents keep being updated, and I've noticed that the government updated them on the 14th. So our office here has got to make sure that they do a cross-check between our audit that we did back in May and actually what else has the government added to it. So obviously there's going to be face coverings in terms of public transport and things like that. I don't expect anything major to have been added, but we'll do that sense check for you before we issue it. But please do keep a check on updates after the 14th of June, because then that will be up to you to keep it updated. So your audit then forms exactly where you are in terms of what have we done, what have we still got to do, and put those actions onto your action log. Now, one thing I would just flag for you is please remember that there are lots and lots of other pieces of legislation with this. And I'd like to highlight the top ones for you that the government advice do not mention, but in terms of the wider health and safety framework, please don't forget them. So for example, you'll all have a fire risk assessment if you've got premises. So the fire risk assessment has a little category in it that says if there's been a significant change, you need to review your fire risk assessment. So COVID-19 most definitely is a significant change with much of our people going and working from home. Some may have ticked over, but your arrangements on the ground will be slightly different. You don't need an external person to come and do that for you. You can do it internally, but please do have a look at making sure that you've got sufficient fire marshals for that period, first aiders, but also have a look at how you're dispersing if your fire alarm went off. the guidance is saying that COVID-19 is secondary to a fire evacuation. So the fact that you might be close together exiting the building, we aren't to be overly concerned about because it's not for a long period of time. But if you're then expecting people to stand close together at your assembly point, you might like to consider changing that to a dispersal approach for the period of COVID. Now, this is entirely up to you. It is a suggestion and a suggestion only. Where you have small numbers and lots of space, it really isn't going to be an issue. But for some of you, it may well be. Also make sure that you link in with the mental health and wellbeing side. Certainly with working at home and the advice we've been giving out right the way through is different people will handle these changes in different ways as they will coming back into the workplace. So making sure that you've thought about that and consulted with employees of how you're going to do it is really important, and giving them that support. Working from home brought its own challenges. Certainly the HSE said temporary for 12 weeks or so. We didn't have to do full DSE assessments at home. However, we're getting into a period now where we can't really say it's temporary much longer, and some people will be doing it for even longer. So if you haven't already, make sure that you're starting to put together home working procedures and making sure that people aren't experiencing any discomfort. We weren't necessarily expecting them to have the 5-star base chair working with the dining table, but making sure that they had that back support with cushions and whatever else they needed, and laptop risers if it was going to be a keyboard with the computer. So it's a little bit of work required around that. And certainly where we're looking at COSH products, so chemicals, the cleaning chemicals, the market's changed hugely on that. And now there are some products out there that are reasonably low cost, which will last for 28 days. So in terms of your cleaning regimes, have a look at products out there, because actually with your high touch points, you can actually save an awful lot of time and effort with the team on the ground. And just to give you a little bit of information on the side, Transport for London are actually trialling a very expensive product that is 60 days. So they really are taking our safety to the forefront in terms of the products they're using with nanotechnology in them. So we're just waiting for all the feedback from those, but those are mega money. Think about the building as well. It may be that you've turned your air conditioning off whilst you've been out. It may be that you haven't necessarily allowed all your statutory inspections to take place. Certainly, I know some clients have and some clients haven't. It depends what's been going on. But before you have staff going back into the building, please make sure that your statutory inspections are up to date. And if by any chance something isn't, then just ring fence it, lift out of order, for example, or waiting its statutory inspection. Just have a think about what can be taken out rather than it stopping the process. So just moving on in terms of risk assessment, just double checking the time here. Okay. There are several ways of doing this, and it's got to really fit with how you manage risk within your building and within your company. One option is to look at the options that I've put on the side, on the left-hand side, from social distancing through to the vulnerability of staff as possible headings that most things will fit into. Or you could do it another way that I saw one of the solicitor practices suggesting, which is to consider all the points of contact where a transmission could take place, and then actually write your risk assessment based on those areas. But please be mindful, there are 2 levels of risk assessment here. One is your overall company one that says this is how we're going to manage it. But then on the ground, your teams need to look at, okay, well, how are we going to do that for the tasks that we perform? So it might be, for example, that you have quite a lot of equipment or boxes arriving where you aren't in a position to have trolleys and you need 2 people. So for that task, I would suggest you will probably need to be wearing face masks, because you're going to be in close proximity to each other and you can't maintain your 2 meters. So make sure your teams are informing you to let you know where they can't abide by the rules that you're putting in place, and where the government's put the rules in place. There will be other ways of doing it, but that's where you need to capture them in a risk assessment at operational level. Hopefully there won't be a lot, but don't forget it as a key area where you may not be able to comply with the things that you're putting in your company risk assessment. So in terms of summary, what activities will cause the transmission of the virus to, what's that cross transmission that's going to take place? Who's it going to be? So who could be at risk? How likely are they that they could be exposed? And can you remove it entirely in terms of the controls you can put in place? Or have you got to add extra layers here? It's that thought process that that team that's working together need to run through. Now I've put on screen here an example template of a risk assessment. There is no right or wrong on a risk assessment there in terms of the format of it. I've seen hundreds of styles. It's whatever works for you. And don't go putting another template in place. Use what you've got if it says the main things on it. But ultimately, we're looking for a description. What's the hazard? And obviously, it's contracting the COVID. Who would be harmed? What's our existing controls? What are we currently doing as at today that actually protects our staff? And what's the current risk level? Now, you'll all have different ways of assessing risk. I've kept it quite simple on this one using a 5x5 matrix of likelihood and severity, and I haven't done any numeric references on this one. But use whatever your company is used to. But ultimately, it's what's our risk at the moment? What else do we need to do, which is in this additional column? So that's our bit that links back to our action log. And then once we've done that, what would the new risk level be? And are we prepared to accept that? Is it tolerable? Yes or no? So that gives an idea in terms of the format. In terms of the content itself, it's entirely up to you quite how you want to set that out. And if anybody would like to speak to me separately offline on that one, I'd be more than happy to chat through ways of doing it. Now, what I would say is don't forget to regularly review your risk assessment. And the bit that some companies forget with, we've said we're going to do this, is it in place, but is it working? And documenting that, because if you don't do the monitoring and you don't assess it, that's an area of risk to the business. Certainly yesterday somebody gave me a call and said, we've done exactly what you said, we thought we'd done everything, we did our audit plan, everything was fine, we walked in and actually it wasn't how we thought it was going to be on the ground at all. Nobody had their face masks on where they should have done, and it had gone to pot on the ground. So just be mindful of that it's got to be supervised, it's got to be monitored. But before you start doing that, make sure that you've had that consultation with employees and you've told them what that expectation is when they go back into the office. What's that standard that you're setting? And I'd be wrong if I didn't mention the hierarchy of controls with risk assessment. So PPE is the last form of defence. I don't propose to go through it now, but it will be in the slide pack that you get. Certainly that's something that we all have to follow when we're doing risk assessments. So make sure you communicate the outcome of your risk assessment. It's really important and it is a legal requirement. So we've got this document as a management team, we've all signed, just about to sign it off. Give it to the people that you've selected as your group for the consultation and make sure they have the opportunity to give input into it before it goes live. That's a legal requirement. Please don't forget to do that one. But once you've done your audit, by the time you've actually ticked everything off on your audit, you will then be able to sign the Staying COVID-19 Secure Government poster, which some people are wishing to put up in their workplace. Again, that's entirely up to you, but it gives those coming into your workplace confidence that actually you've gone through this process and you can hand on heart say you have taken all the precautions that are necessary and you will continue to monitor it. So in terms of the content that I was wishing to give you, I think we're just at the 25 minutes now, Alison, aren't we? So I'm very happy to connect with any of you that would like to on LinkedIn, but let's flick across to any Q&As that you might have. But I hope it's been helpful.
Thank you, Jacqui. That was very helpful and lots of detail in there. So I was going to just check if you were going to share the slides, because I've been asked that, but you've answered that question. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions on the chat, but I'm happy for people to ask questions first if anyone wants to do that. No? Okay. All right.
Have I stunned everybody?
Sorry, Alison, may I ask a question? It's Helen Gray here.
Hi, Helen. Yes.
Hello. Hi, Jacqui. Thank you very much. That's really, really helpful. Do you have, I just wondered, do you have a sense as to when you think offices may be allowed to reopen? We've done our risk assessment. We're putting measures in place. I think I've communicated regularly with the team to ensure they've been part of the risk assessment. They know what measures we're putting in place. I'm sort of desperate to have more concrete information from the government so we know when we might be allowed to go back.
Yeah, certainly. Well, at the moment, the stance is work at home if you can. My best guess, and it is a guess, is that I can see it probably August time onwards. I know that there are some businesses that, for example, Google aren't even going to look at it till January, but others will assess it on the basis of risk. But one thing to make sure in your planning, if you haven't already, just make sure that you understand the vulnerabilities of the staff coming back, because there will always be some categories of people that mustn't come back to the office. So that will be one caveat that must go in there. But for those that are fit and well, and you can confirm that you've gone through the entire process, you've got your poster up, you've done everything, it actually comes down to business risk here, because ultimately, if your workforce, let's say you've got 20 people and you've got 2 or 3 that say, it's absolutely driving me mad being at home, I need to come back to work for my mental health. Or, God forbid, but let's say you've got somebody in your workforce that's suffering from domestic abuse. In those instances, they could be raised as a higher priority than COVID. So you can actually say, okay, for X number of people, let's say 10% of the workforce, we will make our offices available on a phased basis, and this is how we're going to do it. So it's not so much of a question as, is it going to be one opening day for most businesses? I can see it being phased, but phased based on risk, which may happen an awful lot earlier for some businesses than others. Does that answer your question?
That's really, really helpful. And can I just very quickly, do you ask your staff to declare their vulnerability? Is that a question you throw out to the team, or how do you gather that information?
Very good question there. It's a very sensitive one. It is GDPR related. Certainly from some of the ways I've seen clients getting around this one is to put together a vulnerability assessment or a process that actually says, well, these are the government guidelines with a link. If you believe that you are in this category, we want you to come forward and talk to us so we can go through the vulnerable risk assessment with you, because that will be one of the legal requirements in terms of returning for work. The good news is you don't have to keep the risk assessment part of that. The only piece you need to keep is the section that's what actions have you agreed jointly. So you could actually give the risk assessment that's got the personal details back to the employee, but make sure that you have a written process, the form available, and the actions, the bit to keep, so that if you're ever asked to demonstrate it, you can.
Fantastic, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Jacqui, I've got a couple of questions on the chat. So Michelle asked, does someone have to review the home workers situation? And connected to that, would you suggest asking staff to complete and sign a personal assessment of their working area that you can then keep on file?
Yes, and this is a very big subject at the moment, so thank you, Michelle. In terms of home workers, it really will depend what your starting point is at the moment. So if I said, I would expect to be in place a home working policy, a DSE office policy, or you could have that all together or separate, is entirely up to you. So have your team been trained in how to set themselves up ergonomically for DSE whilst they were at the office, and did that include for when they were working at home? So depending on the answer for that one will vary my answer to your question. So let's assume they've had the training so they know how to set themselves up. Then there's no reason they can't do a self-assessment, but you'd need a form for that in their own home environment and reissue it to you. So then you would know what extra equipment do they need. Would it be a laptop stand riser? I mean, yeah, this is a whole different seminar, really, in terms of this particular subject. But you need to know, as an employer, are they sitting correctly? Are they not actually going to cause themselves any harm? Have I given them the information and training to be able to do that? So what I've seen is clients that have done it already, it's straight self-assessment, they can do it. Those clients that hadn't yet got to that point, you can do it via a webinar, train them all remotely, and actually then do self-assessment forms. But what you do need ultimately is a form for the home environment, and you need one for the work environment. So you need two. And there'll be a slight difference between those that have been doing it temporarily and those that actually may be taking it up longer term, which is an option that I can envisage quite a lot of businesses putting in place. They've seen some benefits of actually people productivity going up whilst they've been at home, and they may opt to be doing it a little more. You become a permanent home worker if you're working at home on average for, let's say, 1 day a week. Use that as a rough benchmark. You will have to have two forms. If you're doing it once in a blue moon, once you're back, then you won't be officially a home worker. And you don't have to be contracted to be a home worker. The very fact that you're allowing people to work at home automatically means that that agreement is in place between employer and employee. Does that answer the question okay?
Great, okay. I've got a question from Indira. So she says, and Indira, if you want to chip in, please do, because I know you've asked a couple of questions here. But she says, as counsellors, we can work online from home. However, is there any guidance on how we balance this with clients' needs to be seen in person? She's talking specifically about mental health issues there. Okay.
If Indira's able to just answer it, is it as a medical practitioner style of counselling, or is it a more gentle entry-level counselling?
So I'm not sure how to decipher, but it's from a sort of psychotherapist counsellor. So it's not CBT, it's not surface, it is deeper than that, yes.
Okay. I'm seeing lots and lots of things going online now, and that's from GP surgeries right the way across the board, and many counsellors going online. It's been the only way to give support to people over this period of time. My personal opinion is that there will be an element of this that actually Joe Public's really benefited from, where they haven't been able to necessarily get support that they wanted to whilst they were at work because of the hours they were doing. You know, that the standard working life means that getting hold of services such as yours within core hours, for some people it's just not possible. So I would hope that there would be the ability to have both going forward. It could be one of the benefits that come out of this. There will be some things that you can only do face to face, but I would say it's a question of looking at the service that you provide and actually what actually is that in your particular circumstance. You know, take the GP for example. They can't get my blood or my blood test or blood pressure unless I physically go in there. But does my GP know me, and could I speak to them about everything else? Absolutely. And it will be that kind of approach in terms of where does that fall for you? But I would hope that much more can be done online. Does that answer your question okay?
I think so. I think what you're suggesting is that I think you're reiterating what the government says, which is if you can work from home online, then do that. But it's a really difficult thing because some clients feel that they need face-to-face. It's not always suitable for everyone. So it's treading that balance that we've got to do. I think we're all making decisions as individuals. There's nothing definitive to say how we should work. Even our professional bodies aren't giving out guidance either. So we're all coming up with our own interpretations of how we want to work. And I just wondered what your view was, but thank you.
I think the only thing I possibly would add to that one in terms of your own working at home, if it's your own business, it obviously comes down to your own decisions there with government backing. But if you're part of a bigger group, then you'll get guidance from them as well. So obviously you've got to abide by whichever umbrella that you're under.
Yes.
But let's say I was the counsellor and I was making the choice just for me, nobody else is involved, and I have a range of clients. If I found that this person really needs this support, but just doesn't have the technology or whatever, it's not going to work unless I do it face to face, then I would say in that instance, it's a question of you weighing up your own safety and theirs, and actually perhaps can it be done face to face at the moment, possibly outside with 2 meters apart, and actually in a confidential arrangement still be able to provide that service. But that comes down as a very personal thing if it's ultimately just my decision.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Indira, does that answer your other question as well?
I think my other one was
You were asking about meeting clients in person.
Oh yes. Just the other thing was I know a lot of therapists are concerned about passing the virus to clients, and that alone stops them from going any further and working out there. I take the view that my clients have autonomy and the right to choose whether they come or don't come. So I will be meeting some clients face to face, but many others won't be because they don't even want to risk passing it on to clients. And I just wondered whether that was a factor we need to think about at all.
Certainly, third parties is absolutely critical, that you have assessed the risks and the controls that are going to be necessary. Go back 12 months, who would have actually thought that it was mandatory to wear face coverings on public transport? The world has changed. We've all got to get used to it, and there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be more nervous around making these changes, and it's going to take longer for them. But as long as you've got the right controls in place for you and for them, and you must factor them in. So it might be, if they're coming to you, for example, that you provide their face mask before they come in. So they're actually hand gel, face mask, and we sit 2 meters apart. I can see no reason why you couldn't do that. Obviously, if they're sitting on a chair, it's obviously got to be a sterile chair and wipes, and you've got to manage that as well. So any of the touch points that you need to consider, or be doing it outside. There are ways around this. We've got to think a bit broader. And yes, the government are very slowly putting these things in place, but they're not telling every business exactly how to do it for themselves. It's that the guidelines, isn't it? It's really looking at, okay, how does this work for you?
Thank you.
And for your clients.
Thank you. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I've got a couple more questions on the chat for you, Jacqui. A quick one here, I think, from Michelle. So she says, are the health and safety executives supplying the COVID-19 posters, or do we have to source them?
The poster is actually attached to the guidance, and in the slide deck there's a link to that, and it can be just downloaded as a PDF. So it is a downloadable poster that you then laminate it, post it, however you want to at your own end.
Cool. Great.
And it's free. It's free.
Okay, one here from Kavya. One of the employees has asked if air conditioning should be switched on, as it could potentially spread the virus, and would that form part of the risk assessment?
Good question. There's some recent guidance come out about air conditioning, and if anybody wants that separately, I'm happy to share it. Each air conditioning system in each building is going to be slightly different. So the general rules of thumb is that if you can switch it off and open the windows up, even better at this time of year. Where you've had it switched off and you're going back into your office, make sure that you've got the right engineers there that will actually get it up and ready so that it's all been flushed and ready before you go back in. Each system will have a different rate of airflow. So it's understanding what the rate of intake versus extract is going to be. So let's say hypothetically that the maximum your system will give you is 25% airflow change in a certain period of time. That's going to be the best that you can achieve with that system. But there is a cost implication, just be aware that when you set an air conditioning system up to its maximum capability on airflow, the cost of it in terms of electricity goes up. So have those discussions and understand exactly what you're doing with your engineers on the ground. But certainly air conditioning is a factor. The air conditioning industry don't believe it's as much of a red herring as perhaps some areas are perceiving it to be, but I'm happy to share the guidance that's available with anyone that wants it.
Great, okay. And I've got one last question, we've just got time for one more, which is from Nigel, and he says, will cleaning companies going into a home or an office need to carry out their own assessment of the premises?
They already should have, in terms of knowing exactly what the environment is they're going into, and they should put together a COVID-19 risk assessment, and that's the case for any contractors. So any third parties that are coming to your place of work to do an activity. For example, if I go into a company, it's just me, I'm not causing work, I'm just literally going to be sitting and talking to people, so it's slightly different. But the ones that are going in to do a job, whether that be cleaning, catering, maintenance of that sort of nature, yes, always ask them for their updated risk assessments for COVID-19, because that will tell you what they are doing prior to coming to your offices, as also what behaviours they're going to have when they're on your premises. And what you might find is that there's a slight discrepancy between your standard that you're expecting them to perform to and actually the standard that they are offering. And that's when the dialogue needs to take place. They've got to step up to your standards, and they've got to know what you're expecting, where you want their welfare to be, for example. But yeah, absolutely. And for cleaners in particular, they'll have to update their COSH information. So that's their safety data sheets and their task assessments for cleaning, because the chemicals are more than likely going to change. And if they haven't changed, I'd actually question why, because there's some really good products out there that actually mean that things haven't got to be cleaned quite so frequently.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, we're almost at 1:45, so just remains for me to say thank you very much, Jacqui. We will be sharing the slides as you've agreed, and also we'll be sending out a link to the recording for anyone who wants to have another listen or watch of that. Okay, so thanks again, Jacqui. Thanks to everyone who came on the webinar today. Enjoy the rest of the day and have a good weekend.